Most people tend to dismiss tales of ghosts and spirits as mere superstition, preferring the comfort of rational explanations. For the Becker family, life had always been grounded in routine and practical concerns. When they decided to move into the old Victorian house on Elm Street, it was with hopes of a fresh start in their quiet town. The house, with its towering gables and faded white paint, had been on the market for months. Its history was murky, but the Beckers saw only its charm and potential. Tom Becker, a middle-aged accountant, had found a good deal on the property. His wife, Linda, a schoolteacher, was cautiously optimistic, while their teenage daughter, Emily, viewed the move with typical adolescent indifference. The neighborhood was peaceful, and the house's creaky floors and antique fixtures gave it character. It was the kind of home that whispered stories from the past, but seemed inviting rather than foreboding. In the first few weeks, the Beckers settled in without incident. The morning sun filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the wooden floors. Linda busied herself arranging the living room, placing family photos on the mantelpiece next to a tarnished brass clock. Tom unpacked boxes in the basement, occasionally glancing up at the ornate ceiling beams. Emily claimed the smallest bedroom, content to decorate it with posters and fairy lights. They quickly fell into a comfortable rhythm. Weekdays were for work and school, evenings for family dinners and quiet conversations. The old house, despite its creaks and groans, felt like home. Linda often remarked on how peaceful it was, how the neighborhood seemed untouched by the rush of modern life. Yet, beneath that calm surface, subtle oddities began to stir. It was during a late afternoon in early autumn when Linda first noticed the strange chill. She was folding laundry in the hallway when she paused, sensing a sudden drop in temperature. The air felt heavy, as if the house itself was holding its breath. She rubbed her arms but dismissed the sensation, chalking it up to a draft from the aging windows. That evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Tom mentioned hearing a faint tapping sound coming from the attic. Linda and Emily exchanged glances but laughed it off as the house settling. After all, old houses are known to make noises. Still, the sense of unease lingered, subtle but persistent. Over the next few days, these moments multiplied. Doors that had been securely closed were found slightly ajar. Footsteps echoed softly in empty rooms. The antique clock on the mantelpiece occasionally chimed at odd hours, though no one had wound it. Emily complained of shadows flickering in her peripheral vision, but when she turned, there was nothing there. Tom tried to maintain a rational perspective. He checked the locks, inspected the heating system, and even called a handyman to examine the attic. Nothing seemed amiss. Yet the feeling that something was watching, waiting, gnawed at each of them in different ways. One evening, Linda was alone in the living room, reading by the fireplace. The house was quiet save for the crackle of logs. Suddenly, a cold draft swept through the room, extinguishing the flames. She shivered, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. As she reached for the matches to relight the fire, her eyes drifted toward the staircase. There, standing at the top landing, was a figure, tall and shadowy. The man's outline was blurred, as if made of smoke. His posture was rigid, his presence unnerving. Linda froze, unable to speak or move. The figure seemed to gaze down at her, though no facial features could be discerned. Moments stretched unbearably before the apparition dissolved into the dimness. Heart pounding, Linda hurried upstairs to check the bedrooms. Emily was asleep, curled beneath her blankets, unaware. Tom was out of town on a business trip, so she was alone with her fear. The experience left her shaken, the peaceful domesticity of the house shattered. The next morning, Linda confided in Tom over the phone. He was skeptical but promised to return early that week. Meanwhile, Linda began researching the house's history, hoping to find a logical explanation. She visited the local library, combing through old newspapers and property records. The house had stood for nearly a century, passing through various owners, some of whom had left abruptly. The townsfolk were tight-lipped. When Linda inquired at the corner store, an elderly man named Mr. Harris lowered his voice. "That house has stories, all right," he said, eyes flicking toward Elm Street. "Some say it's got restless spirits. Others, that bad things happened there long ago." He shook his head as if to dispel the thought. Determined to understand, Linda dug deeper. She uncovered mentions of a reclusive man named Harold Becker, who had lived in the house decades earlier. Harold's life was shrouded in mystery. He had no close family and was rumored to have died under unclear circumstances. Some whispered that he had been involved in tragic events, though details were scarce. As days passed, the family's unease grew. Emily became withdrawn, avoiding the stairs. Tom, though still rational, admitted to feeling uneasy when alone in the basement. Linda's nights were restless, haunted by dreams of shadowy figures and cold corridors. The house, once a symbol of new beginnings, was revealing a darker side. One afternoon, Tom and Linda sat at the kitchen table, the late sun casting long shadows across their faces. They spoke cautiously about what each had experienced, hesitant to fully confront the reality. The house was no longer just a building. It had become a presence, an unseen force that intruded upon their lives. Yet, despite the fear, the Beckers remained. The house was theirs now, and they were determined to unravel its secrets. The ordinary rhythms of their days continued, punctuated by moments of dread and uncertainty. In the quiet town, the old Victorian stood as a silent witness to their unfolding story, its walls holding memories that refused to fade. The Beckers' journey into the unknown had only just begun. As the days stretched on, the subtle disturbances that had once seemed innocuous began to unravel the fabric of normalcy for the Becker family. The old Victorian house on Elm Street, which had initially promised a fresh start, now whispered secrets through its creaking walls and shadowed corners. The unease that had nestled quietly within their daily routines was growing louder, more insistent. It was Emily who first noticed the shadows moving with purpose. One afternoon, while studying in her bedroom, she glanced toward the window only to catch a fleeting figure dissolving into the gloom beyond. The shape was indistinct, but the sensation of being watched prickled her skin. She tried to dismiss it as a trick of the light, yet the feeling persisted. That evening, she confided in her mother, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, I think someone's in the house," Emily said, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. Linda tried to soothe her, brushing a strand of hair behind Emily's ear. "It's probably just your imagination, honey. Old houses like this play tricks on us." But deep down, Linda felt the same creeping dread. The cold drafts, the unexplained noises, they were not figments of imagination. That night, she lay awake, listening to the house breathe around her. The soft tapping on the walls grew louder, echoing through the corridors like footsteps. She pulled the covers tight, willing herself to believe that the house was simply settling, that there was no lurking presence. Tom returned home the following day, his business trip cut short by a persistent unease he couldn't shake. The moment he stepped through the front door, a wave of cold washed over him. The house felt charged, as if it held its breath in anticipation. Over dinner, Linda recounted her encounter with the shadowy figure on the staircase, her voice trembling slightly. Tom frowned, skepticism battling concern. "Are you sure you didn't just see a trick of the light? Maybe a shadow from the trees outside." "I wish it were that simple," Linda replied. "But I don't think I imagined it." That evening, Tom decided to investigate the attic, the origin of some of the unexplained noises. Armed with a flashlight, he climbed the narrow stairs, the wooden boards groaning beneath his weight. The attic was cluttered with forgotten relics, old trunks, faded photographs, and dust-covered furniture. As he swept the beam of light across the room, a cold spot stopped him mid-step. His breath visible in the chill air, Tom caught sight of a dark shape near the far wall. It was indistinct, but unmistakably human in form. The figure seemed to watch him, unmoving, before vanishing into the shadows. Heart pounding, Tom hurried downstairs, shaken more than he cared to admit. The following days brought a rapid escalation. Doors that had been firmly latched were found wide open. Objects shifted inexplicably. Books slid off shelves, chairs tipped over without cause. The antique mantel clock chimed erratically, each peal slicing through the stillness like a warning. The family's nerves frayed as the house's presence became more overt, more intrusive. Linda's teaching colleagues noticed the change in her demeanor. Once cheerful and composed, she now appeared distracted and pale. At home, she found herself avoiding certain rooms, especially the hallway leading to the attic. Emily, once eager to explore, stayed close to her parents, clutching her stuffed animal tightly at night. The neighborhood, once a haven, seemed indifferent to their plight. The locals offered little comfort, their eyes clouded with unspoken knowledge. Mr. Harris, the elderly man from the corner store, caught Linda's gaze one afternoon and shook his head slowly. "That house, it's got a history," he said quietly. "Some things never rest easy." Driven by a growing need to understand, Linda and Tom delved deeper into the house's past. They uncovered records hinting at a string of tragedies tied to the property. Former tenants had left suddenly, their departures marked by rumors of madness and despair. The most chilling detail was the death of Harold Becker, the reclusive man who had once called the house home. Official records noted his passing as accidental, but whispers of something darker lingered in the town's collective memory. As the haunting intensified, so did the strain on the family's relationships. Arguments erupted over how to respond, Tom advocating for logic and patience, Linda leaning towards seeking outside help. Emily became increasingly withdrawn, her schoolwork suffering as fear held her captive. One night, the tension reached a breaking point. Linda was in the kitchen preparing dinner when the lights flickered violently. A cold gust swept through the room, extinguishing the stove's flame and plunging her into darkness. The sound of footsteps paced the hallway outside, slow and deliberate. Heart hammering, Linda called out, but only silence answered. Meanwhile, upstairs, Emily lay frozen in bed as a shadowy figure appeared at her doorway. The outline was vague yet unmistakable, a tall man, his presence oppressive. She squeezed her eyes shut, whispering a prayer until the figure dissolved. The next morning, the family gathered in the living room, the weight of the previous night pressing down on them. Tom's face was pale, his usual composure shattered. "We can't ignore this anymore," he admitted. "We need help." They reached out to a local paranormal investigator, a man named Marcus who had built a modest reputation for uncovering the truth behind hauntings. Marcus arrived with equipment, EMF detectors, infrared cameras, and voice recorders, tools designed to capture evidence of the unseen. The Beckers watched with a mixture of hope and apprehension as he set up in the dimly lit house. The investigation began that evening. Marcus moved methodically through each room, narrating his findings. The EMF detectors flickered erratically in the hallway near the attic, and the cameras picked up fleeting shadows. At one point, a faint whisper echoed through the living room, captured only by the sensitive microphones. Yet, despite the evidence, the source of the disturbances remained elusive. The house seemed to resist explanation, its secrets buried deep within its aging walls. As the night wore on, the activity intensified, doors slammed, lights flickered, and an overwhelming sense of despair filled the air. The Beckers huddled together, their fear mingling with frustration. Marcus warned them that some spirits were not easily appeased, and that the house's history might hold the key to understanding the unrest. But no matter what rituals or devices they employed, the haunting persisted. In the days that followed, the family's cohesion frayed further. Sleep became elusive, replaced by restless nights and vivid nightmares. Linda found herself questioning her own sanity, while Tom struggled to maintain rationality in the face of mounting evidence. Emily's silence grew heavier, her once bright eyes dulled by fear. The old Victorian house on Elm Street had transformed from a home into a battleground, a place where the past and present collided, and where unseen forces tested the limits of the Becker family's resolve. The boundaries between reality and the supernatural blurred, leaving them trapped in a cycle of fear and uncertainty. Yet, amidst the turmoil, one truth became clear. Whatever lurked within the house was not content to remain hidden. It was watching, waiting, and growing stronger with each passing day. The house's oppressive atmosphere deepened as the Beckers sought to grasp the origins of the disturbances that plagued their daily lives. Linda, driven by a desperate need for answers, immersed herself in the local archives, determined to uncover the story behind the old Victorians' shadowed past. The more she learned, the more the house's secrets began to unravel, threading together a tapestry of tragedy and mystery that echoed through the decades. At the town library, beneath the flickering fluorescent lights and the musty scent of aged paper, Linda pored over yellowed newspapers and dusty records. The house had stood on Elm Street for nearly a century, its once grand facade gradually weathered by time and neglect. The earliest account she found mentioned Harold Becker, the house's most infamous occupant, a man shrouded in enigma. Harold Becker had been a solitary figure, a recluse who rarely ventured beyond his property. Townsfolk whispered of strange behaviors and sudden outbursts, rumors that painted him as a man tormented by unseen demons. Official records stated that Harold died in the house under unclear circumstances, an apparent accident, though the details were scant and suspicious. Some reports hinted at a descent into madness. Others suggested darker forces at play. Further investigation revealed a pattern of misfortune tied to the property. Before Harold, several families had lived within the house's walls, each departing abruptly, leaving belongings behind as if fleeing unseen terror. Newspaper clippings chronicled disappearances and unexplained deaths. An account from the 1920s detailed a fire that claimed the life of a young woman, her existence all but erased from official records but preserved in whispered recollections. Linda's research was interrupted one afternoon by a call from Tom. His voice, usually steady, carried an edge of unease. "I found something," he said. "In the basement, old letters, diaries maybe. They belonged to Harold." Together, they sifted through the brittle pages, each word a glimpse into Harold's troubled mind. The diaries revealed a man obsessed with the idea of spirits and the afterlife, recording his attempts to communicate with entities he believed haunted the house. His writings grew increasingly erratic, filled with descriptions of shadowy figures and voices that no one else could hear. One entry spoke of a presence that lingered, a darkness that refused to be banished. The family began to piece together a narrative. Harold Becker's isolation and obsession may have awakened or attracted something malevolent, a force tethered to the house itself. This dark history cast a long shadow over the Beckers, explaining the escalating supernatural activity that had invaded their lives. Meanwhile, the haunting intensified in ways that defied explanation. Late at night, Linda would hear whispers drifting through the halls, voices that seemed to speak in a language just beyond understanding. Emily's nightmares grew vivid and terrifying, her dreams populated by faceless figures and endless corridors. Tom reported phantom footsteps echoing through the basement, a rhythmic tapping that mirrored the beat of his own racing heart. The house's physical environment seemed to respond to the unrest. Cold spots appeared unpredictably, chilling the air to bone-deep cold. Lights flickered without cause, and the heavy wooden doors slammed shut with violent force. The family's sense of safety eroded, replaced by a pervasive dread that clung to every corner. One evening, Linda decided to confront the past directly. Armed with the diary entries and a lantern, she ventured alone into the attic, the epicenter of many of the strange phenomena. The room was cloaked in darkness, dust motes swirling in the pale light. As she stepped inside, the air grew heavy, pressing against her chest. She spoke aloud, reciting passages from Harold's writings, hoping to reach whatever lingered beyond the veil. The silence was thick, then suddenly broken by a low moan that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The temperature plunged, her breath visible in the frigid air. Shadows coalesced near the far corner, shifting and writhing like smoke caught in a breeze. Linda's voice trembled, but she pressed on, imploring the presence to reveal itself, to explain its unrest. The response was a sudden gust that slammed the attic door shut behind her, plunging her into darkness. Panic surged, but she forced herself to remain calm, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon her. When Tom arrived minutes later, alerted by the commotion, he found Linda shaken but unharmed. Together they left the attic, the house seeming to settle around them as if momentarily appeased. Yet the encounter confirmed what they already feared. The house harbored a restless spirit, bound by sorrow and rage. In the days that followed, the Beckers sought guidance beyond the physical and historical. They turned to local historians and spiritual advisors, hoping to unravel the complex web of the house's past. One elderly woman, Mrs. Callahan, claimed to have known Harold Becker's family and shared tales of his descent into despair, of rituals performed in desperation to contain the darkness he believed inhabited the home. She spoke of a tragic event long buried, an accident involving Harold's sister, who perished within the house under mysterious circumstances. The loss had fractured the family, leaving wounds that festered through generations. Mrs. Callahan suggested that the spirit haunting the house was not merely Harold's, but a confluence of tormented souls trapped in perpetual unrest. Armed with this knowledge, the Beckers faced a grim reality. The house was more than a structure. It was a vessel of accumulated grief and pain. The spirits that roamed its halls were echoes of lives interrupted, of tragedies that demanded acknowledgement. The family's emotional toll deepened. Linda found herself haunted not only by the house, but by the weight of the past, questioning her own strength to endure. Tom wrestled with feelings of helplessness, torn between protecting his family and confronting forces beyond his comprehension. Emily, caught in the crossfire of spectral unrest and familial strain, retreated into silence, her youthful innocence eroding under the shadow of the haunting. As the Beckers navigated this labyrinth of history and haunting, the house seemed to respond in kind. The supernatural activity ebbed and flowed, sometimes violent, sometimes eerily calm, as if the spirits were testing the family's resolve. The dark legacy of Harold Becker and those who came before was no longer hidden, but a living presence, shaping the family's reality. In the quiet moments, Linda pondered the nature of the house itself. Was it merely a site of tragedy, or something more, a threshold between worlds, a prison for souls denied peace? The questions lingered unanswered, their weight pressing down like the heavy velvet curtains that draped the windows. The Beckers understood that their journey was far from over. The house's history was a puzzle with missing pieces, its spirits restless and demanding. Each revelation brought new fears and deeper mysteries, weaving a complex tapestry of the past entwined with the present. Their struggle was no longer just against the unseen forces, but against the echoes of time that refused to be silenced. The house on Elm Street held its secrets tightly, but the Beckers were determined to uncover them, no matter the cost. The house on Elm Street no longer felt like a home to the Beckers. It had become a battleground, a place where unseen forces tested their limits and strained the bonds that once held the family together. Despite their growing understanding of the house's tragic history, the supernatural manifestations only intensified, casting a shadow over every waking moment and fraying their nerves to breaking point. The Beckers enlisted help beyond their own efforts, turning to paranormal investigators and spiritual advisors with hopes of finding relief. Marcus, the investigator who had first arrived with his equipment, returned with a team, armed with new tools and a renewed determination to confront the restless spirits. Cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and voice recorders were placed strategically throughout the house, capturing hours of footage and audio that chronicled the eerie disturbances. Objects moved seemingly of their own accord. Books slid off shelves, chairs tipped without cause, and lights flickered with a sinister rhythm. The investigators documented whispers caught on tape, voices faint but insistent, murmuring words that chilled the blood. Yet, despite the technology and expertise, the house remained defiant, its secrets stubbornly sealed. One evening, during a seance organized by a visiting medium, the house's malevolent presence became terrifyingly tangible. Candles flickered and guttered as unseen hands seemed to grasp at the air. The medium's voice shifted, becoming strained and urgent as she relayed messages from the other side. Her eyes rolled back briefly, and she warned of a dark force bound to the house, a spirit that sought not just to haunt but to possess. The seance ended abruptly when a sudden gust extinguished all the candles, plunging the room into darkness. The Beckers and the investigators retreated, shaken but resolute. The medium cautioned that the spirit's rage was fueled by unresolved anguish and that any attempts to dismiss or ignore it would only exacerbate the torment. In the days that followed, the house's hostility escalated. Doors slammed with violent force, windows shattered inexplicably, and chilling drafts swept through rooms even with the windows closed. The Beckers found themselves walking on edge, listening for the faintest sound that might signal an impending disturbance. Linda's health began to decline under the constant stress. She suffered from headaches, insomnia, and a creeping sense of despair that clung to her like a second skin. Tom, though determined to protect his family, grew increasingly withdrawn, his usual calm replaced by a simmering frustration. Emily, once bright and curious, became a shadow of herself, retreating into silence and fear. A particularly harrowing night marked a turning point. Linda awoke to a cold presence in her bedroom, the shadows shifting and coalescing into a vague but menacing form. Paralyzed by fear, she watched as the apparition reached toward her, its invisible fingers brushing against her skin. The sensation left her weak and gasping for breath. Tom, alerted by her cries, rushed to her side, only to find the room empty but charged with an oppressive energy. In the aftermath, the family realized they could no longer endure the haunting alone. They sought the assistance of a priest known for performing blessings and exorcisms. Father O'Donnell was a stoic man with a reputation for confronting darkness head-on. He arrived armed with holy water, crucifixes, and prayer books, prepared to wage a spiritual battle within the house's walls. The ritual began in the dimly lit living room. The family gathered close as Father O'Donnell intoned prayers, sprinkling holy water along doorways and windows. The atmosphere thickened, the air heavy with a palpable tension. For a time, the house seemed to resist, groaning and creaking as if protesting the intrusion. Suddenly, a piercing scream echoed through the halls, followed by the shattering of glass. The priest's voice rose, commanding the spirit to depart. The Beckers clung to one another, hope mingling with terror. But as the ritual progressed, it became clear that the house's darkness was not so easily expelled. Despite Father O'Donnell's efforts, the manifestations persisted. The spirit's wrath seemed to intensify in response, its presence more aggressive and unrelenting. The priest admitted defeat, urging the Beckers to consider leaving the house for their own safety. The failed exorcism dealt a heavy blow to the family's morale. The house had won this battle, its malevolence undiminished. The Beckers faced the grim reality that the haunting was not a simple disturbance, but a deeply rooted curse tied to the house's history. Their relationships, already strained by fear and exhaustion, began to unravel further. Sleepless nights bred irritability and despair. Arguments flared over what to do next, whether to fight on or flee. Emily's silence grew more profound, her eyes distant as if seeing things beyond the visible world. Tom and Linda struggled to maintain a united front, but the weight of the haunting pressed relentlessly upon them. The house had become a prison, its invisible chains tightening with each passing day. In an effort to find respite, the family attempted to establish boundaries within the home. Certain rooms were avoided, doors locked, and rituals performed to create protective spaces. Yet, the spirit's influence seeped through cracks and crevices, refusing to be contained. The Beckers began documenting their experiences in detail, hoping that by recording events, they might find patterns or insights that could lead to a solution. Every creak, shadow, and whisper was noted, creating a chronicle of their torment. As weeks turned to months, the haunting remained a constant, an unyielding force that shaped their lives. The house's dark history was no longer an abstract story, but a living nightmare they endured daily. Amid the turmoil, small moments of hope flickered. Occasionally, the disturbances would subside, allowing the family brief breaths of normalcy. Linda clung to these fragments, determined to protect her family and uncover a way to break the cycle. Yet the question loomed: how long could they endure this invisible siege? The house's malevolent legacy was a burden heavier than any they had faced before, and the Beckers were caught in its unrelenting grip, struggling to hold on to their sanity and each other as the darkness deepened. The final straw came on a cold winter night when Emily fell gravely ill. It began as a mild fever, but within hours, her condition worsened inexplicably. Doctors were baffled by the sudden onset of symptoms: a high fever, unrelenting chills, and a deep lethargy that left her barely conscious. No clear diagnosis emerged despite exhaustive tests. The illness seemed to defy explanation, as if some invisible force had taken hold of her. Linda sat by Emily's bedside in the sterile hospital room, anguish etched into her face. Tom paced the small space, his worry palpable, the weight of their ordeal pressing down with unbearable force. The house on Elm Street, with its creaking floors and shadowed corners, had followed them here, its darkness extending beyond the threshold of their home. Haunted by the events that had unfolded, the Beckers made the difficult decision to leave the house. Packing their belongings felt surreal. as if they were abandoning not just a place, but a chapter of their lives forever marked by fear and sorrow. The old Victorian stood silent in the cold dawn, its windows like watchful eyes as the family drove away, seeking refuge from a nightmare they could no longer endure. In the weeks that followed, the Beckers grappled with the aftermath. Emily's health slowly improved, but the scars of their time in the house remained. The family struggled to reclaim normalcy, haunted not just by memories, but by lingering questions about what had transpired within those walls. Skepticism from friends and neighbors added to their isolation, their story dismissed as fantasy or exaggeration. Tom, ever the pragmatist, began to document their experiences in detail. He compiled journals, photographs, and recordings, determined to preserve the truth of their ordeal. His writings captured the escalating terror, the failed attempts at cleansing, and the toll the haunting had taken on their family. The act of recording became a catharsis, a way to wrest meaning from chaos. Linda found solace in sharing their story with others who had faced similar experiences. She connected with support groups and forums, discovering a community of individuals who understood the fragile line between the seen and unseen. These connections offered a measure of comfort, a reminder that they were not alone in confronting the inexplicable. Emily, still fragile, began to reclaim her voice, though the shadows of her trauma lingered. Therapy sessions helped her navigate the complex emotions stirred by the haunting, guiding her toward healing. Her resilience became a beacon for the family, symbolizing hope amid the darkness. Yet, even as they moved forward, the Beckers could not entirely escape the past. The old house on Elm Street remained a specter in their lives, its presence felt in fleeting moments. A cold draft in a warm room, a shadow at the edge of vision. The legacy of the haunting was a thread woven into their family's fabric, a reminder of the thin veil that separates the ordinary from the extraordinary. In time, Tom published a book detailing their experiences, blending personal narrative with historical research. The work sought to bridge skepticism and belief, inviting readers to consider the complexities of the supernatural. Reviews were mixed, some praising the authenticity, others dismissing it as fiction. Regardless, the Beckers stood by their story, a testament to the profound impact the house had on their lives. Their tale became part of the town's folklore, whispered among locals as a cautionary account of the house that refused to rest. The Victorian on Elm Street continued to stand, its windows reflecting the passage of time and the echoes of lives intertwined with its haunted legacy. For the Beckers, the journey was both an ending and a beginning. The ordeal had tested their strength, reshaped their understanding of reality, and forged bonds that endured beyond fear. While the mystery of the house remained unresolved, their story served as a powerful reminder of the unseen forces that dwell just beyond the edge of perception and the resilience of those who face them.